Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the HCD vidcast Mindset. This is season 2. So happy to have you join us. Today, we'll be talking to John Ennis, good friend of ours at HCD and of mine personally. I like to say personally. We've done your podcast together. You've been on some webinars with us. We've spoken together in meetings, been part of the same session. So this should be really exciting to hear a little bit more about you and your journey in consumer research and different technologies. Today's conversation is going to really delve into sort of that background of who you are. But before we launch into that, let's talk a little bit about what this vidcast is and who we are. My name is Michelle Niedziela, VP of Research and Innovation at HCD. As always, I am joined by the wonderful Kathryn Ambroze. Kathryn.
Hi, everyone. Yep, I'm Kathryn Ambroze, the Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with HCD. And Michelle is just going to share a little bit about HCD before we hop into today's conversation with John.
So those of you that have joined us on this journey know who we are, but those of you that are new, welcome. HCD is a consumer market research house that uses a couple of different types of methodology, from consumer neuroscience as well as traditional approaches, to understand the consumer journey as they're perceiving, evaluating, and responding to different types of stimuli. We use all sorts of innovative ways to get that sort of understanding, different types of tools. Our tools can be done online or in person and have been done globally around the world. They can also be used to look at the early stages of exploration, all the way through the end stages of validation and product development, as well as all the way through marketing. So without further ado, let's just launch into this conversation because this should be really fun. John, let's hear a little bit about who you are, what type of work you do, the type of place. Well, I met you at Pengboard. You were putting up your poster and you were needing a little bit of help with something there. And so we started talking and it seemed pretty interesting. I do neuro, you're doing AI. Who are you?
Okay, well, yeah, so...
Explain yourself.
Well, it's funny, actually, Michelle. I was thinking earlier this summer, I realized I've been in sensory for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Since the summer of 1995. So my father, Daniel Ennis, a lot of people on the show will know him or know of him as well. He was part of the kind of cohort of people who helped to take sensory evaluation and make it sensory science. At the beginning, sensory evaluation was basically a collection of methods. And there were some statistical analyses that went along with those methods. But in terms of a comprehensive framework, a way of thinking about what's happening when people are giving you sensory measurements, I'm not going to get into naming names here because if I were, I would sort of forget some people and then that wouldn't be good. But let me just say my father was in that group. So as a result, I've known people like Howard Moskowitz since I was 12 years old. So I've been in the field for a long time. And when I was in between it was the summer in between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I started as an analyst for my father. And this is back in the days when clients would mail us data on a floppy disk. It would arrive in the mail. I would write a Fortran program to do some analyses. Yeah. And then we would put it back on put a disk back in the mail, same disk we'd received, but now it had the results on it. We go back to the client and then we'd have a phone call a week later. So that was, the world that we were in. Now, we have these Zoom calls with people all over the world. We just were remarking that you can access other people's screens. We have clients that have R open and I'm like on their computer. They might be in, the other side of the world and I'm like editing their R code in real time, So it's completely amazing.
That really
the transition that's happened just in one lifetime, really. So I did my undergraduate in math and philosophy. So I was double major in the two at Virginia Tech. I actually figured out how to game the system because it turns out that all the logic classes count for both departments. So I got a double major, even though I had only 2 more credits. Yeah,
that's smart.
It took like 120 credits to graduate. I had like 122 and I double major. So I worked it up all perfectly.
Honestly, figuring that out, you deserve the double major.
Yeah.
Well,
makes sense. Good strategy.
If I'd known, I probably could have done it. Yeah. Operations research. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So anyway, so then I did my Ph.D. in math. I went to UC Santa Barbara. And so I got a degree actually in differential geometry in pure math. So that's like the math of theoretical physics. So I did the PhD on the relationship between geometry and topology. So the measurements you might make in a space and the shape of the space. And actually, even the Greeks were aware of this kind of stuff because they were able to prove that the Earth was round by taking measurements over very large distances. Because what happens if you have a triangle over a very large distance on a curved space, the angles are bigger than they would be if it was on a flat space. So you can figure that stuff out. Just imagine how smart you are if you figure that out,
without everything
2,500 years ago. Yeah. So anyway, we're still working on those kinds of things, although it's a little more abstract now. And what happened was, towards the end of getting my PhD, I realized that I was starting to become a very strange person. That when you do math all day, every day for suppose you're doing math 12 hours a day, every day, you just lose your ability to interact with other people. Honestly,
some of my really good friends in grad school were math PhDs, and their work involved staring at a blank wall with a pen and paper, or pencil and paper, right? And thinking.
And I was a total snob too in those days. I look back on that, I can't believe how much of an idiot I was. I thought that real math happened on paper, right? I didn't want to touch a computer. That's
how they were, exactly.
I just think it's so stupid. I was late 90s, early 2000s in California doing math, and somehow I never even occurred to me to get involved with the tech
that whole thing
that was happening. I was like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, I got there eventually.
I got there eventually. Yeah, it took me a while. I was a little bit of a late bloomer in the computer science area. But anyway,
how did that bring you to computational neuroscience then?
Well, what happened? So I was starting to feel like I was getting disconnected from the world, and I didn't like that because I'm a very extroverted person, and so there was this kind of tension. And so I was talking to my dad about what to do, rather than becoming a math professor. And he suggested I talk to his friend Greg Ashby, who is in the psychology department at UC Santa Barbara. And actually, Greg was really spearheading the effort to bring computational neuroscience into psychology at UCSB. And I think, more broadly in the psychology community, he's been a real leader in terms of what's really a new area, a new approach to psychology. So I went and I talked to Greg, and it turns out that he needed some help programming these neural networks that he had. He had a kind of neurobiological theory, and it would be useful to him to have someone program all these differential equations. So I kind of got back into, kind of dusted off my Fortran and got back into programming these neural networks. So we were in there, this would have been starting in the fall of 2004 through the end of 2007. We were programming these spiking neural networks. So they were really much closer to the way the brain actually works than a lot of the neural networks that that are in wide use right now. And I think that those kinds of, So we were programming those neural networks. And it's kind of funny because nowadays what happens is the computer scientists study neurobiology, anatomy, whatever. They study human learning because they're trying to figure out how to write better programs, right? Because there's at least one example of a general purpose learning machine, the human brain. And so they're studying the human brain to try to write better programs. Back in those days, we were writing programs because we wanted to study humans. We were trying to understand, the human category learning, which is, of course, one of the big areas. Classification tasks are a big machine learning task. So basically, we were working on classification tasks, but we were trying to understand how do humans do it. We had our kind of neurobiological, but Greg had a series of them. I think he was one of the first people to really realize that there was always this theory, this kind of top down, and Michelle, you know this better than I think me and most of the listeners. So if I say anything incorrect here, feel free to chime in. But there's been historically this view that learning starts on the outside of the brain and moves to the center. That's kind of the old school view. And what Greg realized, and he wasn't alone, but he was really one of the pioneers of this theory, that it's actually the subcortical structures that learn early, and they then train the cortical-cortical connections. And that that you have this kind of Hebbian learning that happens in the cortex, where you have this idea, neurons that fire together, wire together. If you have two neurons that are often active at the same time, then you'll tend to get connections between those neurons over time. That happens later in the learning process. And early on, there is this kind of training signal that goes to the basal ganglia, where when you need to get feedback almost immediately. I think it's about 2.5 seconds, where after you do something, you need to find out, is this the right answer, yes or no? And if you get the right answer, you get this flood of dopamine, which reinforces these kind of subcortical pathway. And then if that happens enough, then you get the cortical stuff. And that theory turns out to be, I would say at this point, is pretty well just accepted, but Greg led the way in developing that theory. Yeah, when I look at my publications, the 2 papers that I published in that area with him are like by far the most cited papers of mine.
I bet.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've had, like in sensory, I have a few papers. I have at least one that's been cited 100 times, but I think there's 2 papers that have been cited several hundred times. So that was really kind of influential research. So then as I got done in 2007, I was ready to move on. And again, I went to talk to my dad. And so I would say a theme of this is if you have a mentor, it makes a huge difference. And for me, my father has been my mentor, right? So he, I talked to him. He said, well, you can come back and work at IFP. And so I came back as a consultant. Mm-hmm. And that was 2008 that I.
So you never considered going the academic route?
No, not really. I think that I've always wanted to, and I think this is part of why I left math too, is that I've always had this desire to solve real problems. And, like the academic stuff is interesting to a point, but at the end of the day, I always find it to be like more stimulating to be responding to the problems that people definitely
problem solve for people.
Yeah, apply it really. Yeah. I think that's, and
there's
also
personality to that too, as well. Like
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's interesting because, with philosophy, you definitely can get caught up just arguing things that don't matter at all, right? And so maybe I learned a lesson doing the philosophy degree. So I wanted to get into the kind of business world. And so I did that. And then I went on, let's see. So that was quite a journey, because it was great. I think being in the field, because at the beginning I was overseeing a lot of projects. I was in the field a lot, got to see beer being poured. I got to see the kind of errors. This is where I think data quality, we were going to talk a little bit about some of the AI revolution that's happening. Maybe I call it computational revolution that's happening in sensory and consumer science. And I think data quality is like so important. And I can't tell you, you show up for a study and the beers are expired. And if you weren't there, they were going to serve expired beer,
Oh, wow.
So it's just that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Being in the field.
Absolutely. So, we joke a lot of times, we'll say, bad data in is bad data out. So it's a good base. What are you really looking at anyway? Kind of.
And if you don't know what's happening out there in the field, like it can really have an effect. Like I made a stop by at one of our tests once not recently, a couple of years ago, but they were allowing participants to take like their children in with them. Mm-hmm. Or one of them actually brought a dog in with her. And it was like, wait, this can't happen. This is not a thing. This is not allowed. But I had to say that.
Right.
But so that would definitely affect your data.
So I think that was really important experience for me to be in the field and to see, what actually happened. So I traveled a lot for that. And another thing that was really influential for me was that I became the representative at ASTM for Institute for Perception, my father's company. Yeah. And that was huge because that's where I met so many people who had a positive influence on me, like Chris Finley or I'm trying to think other people, Mona Wolf or Chris Van Dongen or Tom Carr, Rob Baker. I mean, there's a long list of my friends there. Darla Hall. I mean, I could name Becky Blybaum, Gail Seville. I mean, all these people that I met there, that had a huge positive influence on me and really became, I think, my social and my support network in sensory, which is another lesson I would say. Network as much as you can. Talk to people like at poster sessions because you never know. Yeah. Like just talk to everybody,
And I think sensory people are nice. Sensory people are really nice. I find them to be very friendly. The difference between going to like a marketing conference and going to a sensory conference, it is a lot more intimate and people are a lot more open to talking and meeting and getting to know one another, I think.
Yes, I agree. No, I think sensory is a great field for that reason. Because these people are interested in the experience of life. Like science, like sensory science is the science of the experience of life. That's the way I think of it. And so you are talking about people who want to, just as an example, I was ASTM's representative, like E18's representative to go, I was called the Can Ambassador. There was the new cannabis group and I was appointed as the emissary from the sensory evaluation group to go and meet I went to the ASTM, I think I don't remember, D something or other, like the new cannabis group, right? D46 or something like that. So I went to their meeting in Denver and it was so weird to not be around sensory people because we went out to lunch and no one was talking about the food. We were just talking about like the chemical properties of terpenes or whatever. And like, I was like, the food's delicious. Is no one noticing this? Like, Yeah,
Oh,
so that
that's
was
great.
yeah. So I think that's good being in sensory. So I went to ASTM, presented at conferences, worked on projects. I got a chance. I was really well supported at IFP to do original research. So I did a lot of research, hosted workshops, that kind of thing. And then I got into data science after about I guess now it's probably 7 years ago. But we were doing statistics for regulatory engagement, and the surveys were huge, hundreds of questions. So you probably have worked on regulatory problems where the definitions are like, you have this kind of statistical analysis plan, you have a protocol, and you could really argue all day long about what does it mean for somebody to be a heavy user who does this and this and the other thing. How are you going to define this?
Still have those arguments.
Yeah. Whereas if you have a script, right, and it's defined clearly, these are literally, you can turn that over to, the FDA, you can show it to other statisticians. You don't get into arguments over what the definitions are. That was just one piece of it. So I got into data science, and then I realized that this was going to be obviously hugely transformative. I think all scientists will have to be data scientists to some extent.
I agree.
Future, at least computationally oriented. And 2 years ago, it was really obvious to me that there was a need for this new thing, this need to push computational ability into sensory scientists. And that was, my dad thought that was a good goal, but it just wasn't in line with IFP's business model. So he and I talked, and the best thing for me was to start my own company, which I did, Aigora. Myself and my wife founded that about 2 years ago now. And it's been a lot of fun. So, it's been a great journey learning. Our mission statement is, we help consumer science teams implement artificial intelligence. And learning what that really means in practice has been a fascinating journey. And I think we now really understand it. But it was, there's a difference between having the feeling to do something and then actually working out the details.
Yeah.
So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I think also that a theme of this with your podcast as well, AigoraCast, is that, you didn't stop that networking yet. You still speak to people within not just the sensory field, but maybe somebody that doesn't call themselves a sensory scientist, but calls themselves something else, or they're more of in the business sector of it, having different perspectives, at the table and talking. It's important to be well-rounded, and I think it makes you a little bit more aware of what's going on, not just in the woods, but you also hear stories about how people are conducting research somewhere else. And you get the good and the bad of that, because then you hear, oh no, they're letting dogs into their facility or something. I think that's how we progress as a field in general. So
yeah, and I think you have done a really good job of finding the further ways for everybody to communicate. We just had SSP recently, and that you were bringing in, let's continue the conversation on Discord. Now, whether or not that's actually happening or going to happen, it's actually very cool to be able to say hey, everybody, let's keep talking, and finding new ways to communicate, which I do think that, a bit of this whole pandemic thing has forced people in a way to do that, to find, new ways to communicate, better ways to stay in touch, stay connected with people. So that's very cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your company? And you just touched on it. You started about 2 years ago. What's your real goal because I know you said there was this need that was missing, and it was evident to you that you filled this spot. Yeah.
Well, there's two things. There's kind of there's the opportunities. I think there are a lot of things that are new, that are possible, that are much better. Personally, I think that sensory will be more important than ever as as the physical and virtual worlds kind of converge, and as you get augmented reality. There's different ways that technology is kind of collapsing the world, to a point almost. That as you have more of these kind of online, offline experiences, I think sensory, the thing about sensory is sensory sits in between kind of objective measures and the more subjective experience, right? So we're right in the middle. We're as scientific as you can get before it becomes completely subject, right? Yeah. So it's, So I think that we're really well positioned as a field to provide a lot of value as, physical and virtual converge, as you have to find new ways to communicate with consumers. I just think in business, you think about even an app, right? That UX, like user experience or design, the design field applied to apps, to the user interfaces, is really sensory. I mean, you're talking about the sensory experience of the app, right? I mean, you all know this. You all work on websites. It's the same thing. And I think that we're going to have, with the rise of 5G, you're going to have more sound everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that you're going to be we will all be kind of living in an enriched environment, that we'll have glasses or maybe even contact lenses that are like supplementing what we're seeing. We're going to I mean, I don't know how there's even some new technology, like we saw, like at Penguin, there's one of the keynote speakers was talking about some of the ways to electronically stimulate, to stimulate the tongue, to simulate taste.
Right. Nimesha, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Actually, I think he's going to be on Agoracast at some point. Yeah.
Oh, he's great.
So,
yeah.
I think we will all have something like hearing aids, except they'll have a better name than that, in our ears, where we will be getting sounds. It'll be enriching our experience. And it might even be therapeutic, where it'll be connected to wearables. And as your heart rate, variability increases, there'll be like a soothing sound.
And you calm down. I mean, a lot of people are already wearing the Apple pods, right? So,
So I think sensory is going to play a really key role as, all of these, like all the sensory modalities become sort of continuously important, right? So I think there's great opportunity for us. Now, on the flip side, I think that there are some ways of working within sensory that are really outdated. And there's a risk that if we don't update the way we're working, that we're vulnerable, right? I would say that right now, if you look at, say, where is startup money going? Where is venture capital money going, right? A lot of it is going to one of two areas. It's either going into food tech or it's going into AI. And the intersection of that, the AI-based food tech stuff, a lot of it has got, CPG companies kind of in the crosshairs saying, like, they're making promises that I think, we can talk a little bit about which promises I think are, can be fulfilled, and which promises I think are,
a little bit of a reach.
Are I think not being, I have my own theories about what's going on there, but let me just say that I don't think that all the promises are, I think that there's, in any new area where terms are not well defined, you're going to have people who are doing the tech, fake it till you make it thing, where you make promises and then you hope to get money and then you go try to you try to figure it out. And sometimes it works, like Oracle, right? Larry Ellison was doing that at Oracle, and sometimes it doesn't work, like Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos, where her hope was, we can just figure this out, it'll be great. Yeah, it would be great.
Good ideas, bad follow through.
So I think that, so I do think that there is a real place, like the four areas that we help our clients in are automated processes. It's just indisputable that there are many processes in sensory and consumer science that are kind of mundane, repeatable, can be with a flow chart, perhaps a very complicated flow chart. You could describe what needs to happen to produce 90% of a report. Okay. That can be completely automated and free everybody up to work on their communication, storytelling, this kind of thing. Right. So process automation, I would say that is a huge business value there. And it is indisputable that you can automate the processes. There's no question of is this hype or not. It just does work. So there's that. Then there's knowledge management, which would be getting your data well organized in a form that you can easily go back to. Because I think most large companies, the advantage that they have is they have a huge amount of data. Or suppliers like you all have access to a huge amount of data, right? And so it should be the case that when there's a new business question, you shouldn't have to run new research first. It should be possible that you can ask yourself, what data have we already collected that either directly or indirectly helps us to answer this question? So maybe adjacent data. So you formulate your query, you should be able to pull the data and run essentially a simulated experiment. It should be easy to do that, right? Especially if you've got already your processes automated so that you can run off reports. If you just have the data set, you should be able to go to your database, pull data, which is maybe combined from multiple experiments. Maybe you have some variables in there that tag the fact that you've got different studies involved, so you can find out if it's an important variable or not. But you should be able to get your data, go to your way of doing your analyses, and maybe run in an afternoon several simulated experiments, right? Before you go collect new data. And so then it's not that you're potentially going to answer the question, but you'll have a much better idea how to design the experiment when you've done that, right?
Right.
Another one, of course, is advanced analytics, which would be machine learning. But we also would, we talk about operations research, we kind of mentioned that as a joke, but a lot of the tools for optimizing things are very valuable. You can talk about text analytics would, kind of bear, there's text analytics, there's natural language processing. Natural language processing starts to overlap with machine learning, but all of that is valuable to us. And then, of course, you've got Bayesian statistics, you've got computational statistics, things that we would like to have done for a long time, we just didn't have the computing power. Simulations, permutation tests, this kind of thing. And then the final piece would be using technology to collect data in new ways. Which would be like the smart speakers, which we're collaborating on. It's about the smart speaker research. I think I'm really excited. I mean, I think that, actually, I thought that your NeuroU presentation on wearables was, the presentation that you all gave on wearables was really informative. Wearables are not quite there, I don't think yet, but they will be. There's just no question. They will eventually be useful. Yeah. And smart speakers, I would say, are there in that they're going to get better. Chatbots are something that are interesting. Looking through publicly available data, not necessarily just social media, which I think can have some, I think it's good to look at social media, but I think it's very incomplete. Yeah. But the public, there's a company called Spoonshot that they've had, Sai Kudur, who's their CTO, has been on Aigora Cast, and they collect data from like 23,000 publicly available sources, like startup prospectuses or scientific abstracts, that kind of thing. Yeah. Where I think that, it's good to, if you were collecting that sort of data 3 to 5 years ago, you would have seen plant-based coming, right? Because it was in the scientific literature. So you should be looking at all these different ways of collecting data using technology. You should be thinking about how to analyze the data. You should be storing it in some well-organized way. I like graph databases, but any database would be better than no database. And then, automating your processes. And you put that together, I think you can get some really nice synergies, and you really go to a new way of working.
It could be quite a leap for people to make in some ways, I think. People have this mess of data, basically. Historical pieces from someone who doesn't even work at the company anymore. There are these files that are all over the place, but are very valuable. What sort of challenges do you see most of when people come to you for solutions?
Well, first off, I think that one of the biggest challenges I see is that everybody wants to do AI, but they don't have a good idea what that means, right? Yeah. And so I always say, let's start with a business problem. And a good place to look is to ask yourself, has there been any initiative over the last 5 years where you feel like your feeling is you should have had the data to answer the question, but you never really felt like you threaded the needle, right? That's a good place to start looking to see,
it's very similar to what we say.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. So I think that's, because the fact is there's a kind of, there's a little bit of learning how to work. I mean, I'm calling it now computational sensory science. That's what so I'm giving a keynote at Eurosense in a few weeks. And that's really what I'm going to focus on, is that just like there was this transition from sensory evaluation to sensory science, I think there's another transition going on now. There's a phase shift now to computational sensory science. Just like chemistry became computational chemistry for the most part, or, biology is now to a large extent computational. I think sensory science is going to have to become computational.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean everybody becomes a coder, but it does mean that there's a new way of thinking, right? And people have to learn, for example, that data formatting matters, that, it's not, so when you're, I would say a lot of good habits from data science that we should all, kind of data hygiene, you might call it, that, for example, don't edit your raw data, right? Collect the raw data and then have code that edit, there's a lot of things I can say about this topic, but as far as how to, kind of what should people do, I think it's a mistake to try to get all your data organized and then do analyses on it. I think that you'll never actually finish getting the historical data organized, not before management pulls the plug, because they'll say what's the return here? What much better way to go is have a problem that you care about, get all the data you can find that's related to that problem, put those data in a database. And again, because graph databases are very flexible, you don't have to necessarily worry about all the other types of data that might be out there. You can put your data in a database, okay? And now you're in a position where you can answer a question right away, but you're trying to pull the data together, and then you can grow. I really would say it's much more important to do this in a kind of continuous improvement, partial progress kind of way than to try to, they call it boiling the ocean. I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but if you're trying to organize all your data before you do anything. That's boiling the ocean. So I don't, and you should also, I think, you have to worry about biases if there's some data that are well formatted and easy to get into the database, and then you have others that are, maybe more heterogeneous and harder to organize. You would want to be careful that you don't end up with some skewed view of the past by virtue of the fact that,
right.
Yeah.
I was actually curious about that, because I'm assuming this is part of also your job is to help find that fine line between keeping bias out of the picture, but also the human involved in it, because I know you touched on how automation is a big part of what you help people basically become more efficient with their time management and things like that, because things can be automated. But where do you find that line where, okay, there's certain things though that it still should have a pair of eyes on it from somebody in the company, so that it's not just getting sent right out. It's not just deck.
Well, we build dashboards, interactive dashboards for example, for making reports or for analyses, where the dashboard is like, for example, maybe you've got 20 products and you've got the same sort of slide for every product, right? It should be the case that you can make some choices in the dashboard. You can press go. Usually the way our dashboards work is you press go, you can preview what has happened. Maybe you're running some sort of multivariate analysis, and which products you pick matters. Okay, so you make your choices, you preview it. If you like it, you can make slides. Okay, but what we have is a dashboard where someone is going to easily be able to spin off slides, and then from those slides they build the report. So in the extreme, you can have, if it's very, very routine, you could have just a script, and we have had situations where you press go, you run the script, now you've got your top line. But I think that for most of the interesting work we do, it's more that you want to support the scientist by having a dashboard that's interactive, so that she or he can go through and make their choices. But they're involved. They're like making choices, previewing. That's how we typically work in that way.
Now, you also mentioned that people can struggle a little bit with understanding even what AI means. And I think
Okay.
It's a struggle. Like, what is artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. There's a range of definitions of this term. I prefer the simplest definition, because I think it is very important. I think it's probably more important for our field than for most fields to demystify the term and get over the idea that it's somehow analogous to magic, or that it's like a synonym for magic. That intelligence is, so this definition due to Max Tegmark, who was a professor at MIT. He wrote the book Life 3.0, which I would highly recommend. He said intelligence is the ability to accomplish complex goals. Okay, you have some complex goal. You have the ability to figure out how to accomplish the complex goal, right? Well, actually, it's not even the figuring out. It's the ability to accomplish the complex goal. That's intelligence. That's a sign of intelligence, right? Like my son, even though he was just turned 4. I took him to the grocery store, and I was able to show him with just like 1 or 2 examples how to scan a UPC code, like the UPC. Well, I guess the C is code. The UPC on a grocery item, and he was able, because he's intelligent, to watch me do this and then do it 9 times out of 10 correctly. Right? He did fail one. It was a bag of green beans that he couldn't figure out where the
Those are tricky.
We all fail at least once on something.
But he accomplished, this goal, right?
Yeah.
So it's or you could say complex task. So he did that. Now, what does it mean to be artificial? Artificial just means made by man. So it's just man-made artifice. So artificial intelligence is the use of machines to accomplish complex goals. That's it. So anything that does that is artificial intelligence. The dashboard that's you're using a machine to help you accomplish a complex goal, right? And linear regression, you could say, is use of machine. I mean, if you use a machine to do it, right? I mean, if it's on a piece of paper, it's not artificial intelligence until it's in a machine. But I think that's really important, because I think there's this tendency, because a lot of times people in our field, they have food science background. They know some statistics, but they don't really have a strong computer science background. They tend to get razzle-dazzled sometimes, or that maybe they feel like something's wrong. They're like, this is probably a scam, but they don't speak up. It's like, well, maybe the person knows what they're talking about, right? But what I would say is, if you think it's a scam, it probably is. So trust your gut on that one. And so I think that artificial intelligence is the use of machine to accomplish a complex goal. The end. Let's get over it. Let's talk about what type of AI are we talking about here.
Yeah.
Like, let's just get rid of that term. and say, okay, are we talking about automating some rule-based thing, right? Rule-based AI is a thing. Are you talking about machine learning? If so, what machine learning? Because I mentioned regression. Regression is machine learning. Like machine learning is just that performance improves as you give it more data, right? Like learning, as you all know from psychology, is that learning is when performance improves with experience. Okay, you got some tasks, performance improves with experience. For a machine, experience is data, right? Experience and data are synonyms for a machine. So you're giving the machine gets more experience, its performance improves. Well, linear regression, as you give it more data, the confidence intervals on the parameters, become smaller. So there you go, improved performance. That's machine learning, right? Now you put it in a PowerPoint deck and call it AI and go get some funds. Like,
that is kind of the joke we have, is that, is it even a talk if it doesn't have AI in the title? When you're at like a market research conference, and we're seeing a lot of that. Like, I've been reviewing a lot of papers in the neuromarketing area where everybody's saying AI, and it's not necessarily AI. But I guess they feel they have to say it. I don't know.
Neurological was like that a couple of years ago. Everything was everything was
neuro this, neuro that. Yeah, if it didn't have neuro in front of it, was it even research?
Right.
All the buzzwords. It's the buzzwords.
Eye tracking, right, was called neurological data.
I just reviewed a paper actually that was about eye tracking and AI.
Right.
And it was saying that it was the integration of neuroscience with AI, and it was painful in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, that's
so let's get under the hood.
It's behavior.
I'd say get under the hood, find out what's actually going on. And if the person is really trying to help you, they should be eager to clearly explain to you what's happening. If it's fast talking and fancy words, that is a red flag. It should really be slowly. Can you explain? Like a random forest, right? The idea of a random forest is simple. You have got a whole bunch, like everybody knows what a decision tree is. A decision tree is just like this kind of flow. It's a little bit like a flow chart where, you're branching and you're based on the values of different variables, you're being led down different paths. Okay. That's a decision tree. You can explain that quite easily. Now imagine you have a bunch of them and you put your data through all of them. Now, the details of how you get those trees, that's a little bit technical, but in spirit, you have a bunch of these trees, you pass your data through all of them, you get the answers from every tree, and you combine the results, okay? And it's kind of just like if you have a board of people with kind of diverse backgrounds, they'll probably give a better decision because they'll have like different views. The trees are like that. It's a diverse, and so I explained it to a random forest. If someone can't explain what they're doing with that kind of level of helpfulness, I would say forget it.
I agree.
Because it's probably a scam.
Black box is a terrible problem in research providers, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, so we kind of touched on a couple of the talking points that we had on this slide, but I just want to touch on, because I feel like, as we were saying, neuro was a buzzword, AI is a buzzword, and I feel like everyone's first question is it predictive? And I just want you to clear the air and say, I am sure it's going to have something along the lines of, it depends. But that's our favorite answer.
Yeah. Well, I do think that this is one, if you really are wanting to find out if the person has something real, that's a good question. How are you validating the predictive ability of the model? And don't let them wiggle out of it until they answer it, because that's the question. Because, you've got this, what it means to be, for a model to be predictive, right, is that you can expect the model to perform well on new data. And usually the way in machine learning we figure out the predictive ability of a model is that, like, we don't usually have enough data to do this, but you can imagine, like with Google, what they would do is that suppose you have a lot of data, like, I mean, maybe not millions, or billion, like Google has billions of rows of data, but imagine you have a lot of data. If you had a lot of data, the best thing to do would be to take some of your data, set it aside, put it like in a safe where it can't be anywhere near the model, build your model, and then go and see how the model does on the data that was not even remotely exposed to the model. That would be the best thing to do, okay? Yeah. Now, the second best thing to do is to do something called cross-validation, where you actually build lots of models. And the idea is you take some of your data, set it aside, build a model on the smaller set, see how it does on the data that was set aside. And you do that a bunch of times, where basically you take a different set of data and leave it out each time. And then you combine, there's different ways to combine, but you might say average the performance across, these are called folds, the different subdivisions of the data. So, but then the question is, all right, but what's the process that you're using to create these different subsets of your data? All right. And I would say there's different levels of rigor that can be applied there. And an issue that we have, for example, suppose you want to build a predictive model for drivers of liking. You're going to have data that you're going to have information about your products, you're going to have information about your people. Now, when you take those two data sets and you combine them together, so suppose you have 10 products and 100 people, okay? And you have liking scores for everybody on every product. You have 1,000 rows of data, okay? But you have a lot of dependency because you've got the same 10 products appearing again and again. So the best thing to do would be to have this kind of complex plan where you partition the people somehow, but you also partition the product, and you might build 10 models where you leave out one product and you train a model on the 9 that are left and then see how it does on the one product that was left out,
right?
But using new people also. So you have to kind of do this. There's two things to keep track of. You want new people, new products. So you want, how does the model do on a product that wasn't involved in its training and people that weren't involved in the training? And you do that 10 times. You might put it together. So that's the kind of stuff we need. I think there are a lot of basically descriptive models masquerading as predictive models, where they're doing some fancy stuff behind closed doors, and then they want you to pay to collect new data to see if their model was any good. And maybe it will, by some luck, end up being good. But you shouldn't have to collect new data. You should be able to show it on the data you have.
Yeah, with the goal that eventually you could do a smaller study and then use the model to predict the rest of it, like a larger sample.
Well, even if you use, say, a drivers of liking model to make recommendations to product development, you need to know, like when you think about as you change the parameters and create new imaginary products, those are basically, that's like new data, right? And so you need to know that your model can perform well on new data that's near the data that was trained.
Right.
Now, no model is going to perform well on data that's far away, but data that's near the data that it was trained on. And if you don't have some idea of what's going on in the predictive validity of the model, then you don't have any reason to believe these kinds of predictions that you would use in the product optimization step that we are usually interested in. So these are the kinds of questions I think you have that I would recommend that listeners, you have to dig into that, because if it keeps like feeling like the person hasn't really answered the question, they haven't really answered the question. That's
probably the case. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I think we want to push forward. And I think we talked a little bit about this already, sensory and consumer research and how it can fit in there. But I think an interesting thing to talk about is kind of the next step, which is the next step. So what does the future look like? What's next? Now, you're talking about these big data sets that companies are using and some predictive modeling, but what do you see as coming next?
Well, I think there's at least two areas. Okay. You've got obviously just any kind of automation to make your work more efficient is going to be helpful. It's going to change the way you work. That will support curiosity, because how often do people have an idea? I wonder about, I wonder if this is true. And then it's going to be a giant pain to investigate it. So like if you have your data well organized and your processes are automated, you can investigate more things. So there's that. So that's one change I would say. Another one is simulations, that you're going to have a lot more simulations, that, like we're talking about with when you do product optimization, that's a simulation. You're saying you're simulating what would happen if we made this product. So I think, so that's definitely, like, simulations will be a bigger thing. And then I think the augmented reality, collecting data in new ways, that's going to be a huge thing. I think you guys are really at the forefront with that. And I think that, I think that's great. And I think actually it's interesting. A lot of that stuff combines really well, because you can imagine, I have here some Google Cardboard, which I wouldn't recommend these for sensory research right now because they smell like cardboard. but you can imagine a future where people have, it's going to be more lightweight, but you can be able to, have something that's more ecologically valid. And the nice thing about this is it combines well with a smart speaker, right? Because you can collect data by someone talking when they're in this, augmented environment, right?
Absolutely.
So that would be something. And then you put wearables on it, right? Maybe maybe you have someone completing some, reaction time data, doing implicit measures. Like a lot, you're going to have many views on the experience, and then the machine learning will help you to see what's important and what's not. So I think it's a super exciting time to be doing this research.
And that's why it's always really fun to talk to you. So I really appreciate you joining us, and this was a really cool conversation. There's so much involved in this, and I really appreciated at SSP recently how you guys were really talking about how best to vet out, AI suppliers and some of these new technologies. So I think that's a real important thing, and that's definitely something that we try to focus on as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, and special thanks to John for joining us on this journey. Please hit subscribe so you can get the latest updates as we roll these out. And please visit us on LinkedIn, subscribe to the channel. You can tweet with us. You can also visit our blog. And also feel free to contact John. We'll have his information in the, the description of this video. And we really look forward to having more conversations. It seems like there's a lot more that we could talk about. So it'd be cool to have you back sometime.
Yeah, sure. And LinkedIn. People can reach out on LinkedIn. That's the best way.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.